This is part two of the presentation on colonial development. And in part one, we set the stage for the Salem witch trials. Let's talk about them now. There's also a European context for witchcraft and the persecution of it. For about 400 years, more than 50,000 people in Europe were executed for witchcraft, which was considered a crime. This is far, far in excess of any numbers that were executed in America. But it shows that this is not something that just began in colonial America. Now, in America, though, it was a reaction by the old school Puritans against these social changes, against, ending Plymouth Colony and uniting it with Massachusetts Bay as a royal colony, against religious toleration, against allowing Anglicans to vote and anybody to vote based on property ownership rather than religious status. Now, the typical person accused of witchcraft in these trials was a woman, middle-aged or older, with no husband, but economically independent. These were very often widows who had inherited property, and that was not the normal role for a woman to play in this society. So anybody who was an outsider was at much greater risk of being accused of witchcraft. Witchcraft is doing the work of the devil in the way that they thought of it. Now, in the first century of New England's existence, beginning in 1620, there were 344 people accused of witchcraft. 35 of those were executed. And in Salem alone, in 1692, 20 of those executions took place. 19 of them were of women. Overall, of those 35, 28 of them were women. Now, there were two categories of people involved here. One was the witches themselves, and the other was those possessed by the devil. And as I said, the most likely targets were middle-aged widows without children. Now, this map is very telltale. The triangles represent the accused, those charged with witchcraft. The squares represent the accusers. Now, I should tell you that Ipswich Road was a road that was very closely associated with trade. This was a trade route. And some of these newcomers, a lot of these newcomers lived near Ipswich Road. The old line Puritans lived farther from it, and they were represented by the squares. This is consistent with the idea that the Salem witch trials were a reaction against changes in this society. Now, at this point, let's take stock of the growth of the colonies. This growth, if you look, for example, in some 1670 to 1690, the population had almost doubled, and that was part of the sense of rapid change that a lot of the old line Puritans were not comfortable with, and that contributed to the atmosphere of the witch trials. By the time of the American Revolution, and 1780 would be during the Revolution, the population in all the 13 colonies had grown to about 2.7, 2.8 million. That's pretty rapid growth. Now, this chart is very revealing. Note at the top that most of the people who came to British North America in the 18th century, from 1700 to 1775, when the Revolution began, were not free when they arrived. Now, this includes three categories of unfree people. The largest were slaves, African slaves, 278,000. The next category was indentured servants, 103,000, and then finally convicts, who were sometimes given the choice of either going to a place like Virginia or being hung Virginia started to look a bit better to them. And only 151,000 out of the 585,000 total who came were free when they came. Um, so this gives you an idea of the tremendous growth of slavery during the 18th century. Uh, you will also notice that Germany had a large number of migrants. Germany was not a unified country at the time. There was a lot of turmoil, a lot of economic difficulty in these various German states, and many of them came to the colonies. Um, if we look at this map here, if you look at the legend, for example, in the purple represents German communities. You notice there is a sizable area dominated by German immigrants in South Carolina, another in North Carolina, another in Maryland, a large one in Pennsylvania, and one in New York. This was a very significant population of migrants, and the colonies were becoming more diverse during this period.